Welcome to the segment of the day where I share 3 things about 3 people who've inspired me recently in the last 24 hours. Um, and a couple of them may not be popular with you, and I don't care. I'm still going to mention them, and maybe they are popular with you, in which case I'd love to know. If not, you can keep it to yourself. You can share that too if you want. I do really believe that it is only through the totality of all of our perspectives that we get the whole perspective. So it's just my perspective. And I also believe that sharing what inspires us can inspire each other and also remind ourselves of what we would like to embody more. So that's the spirit behind this experiment. I'm distracted by the mosquitoes that are gathering around me. I'm inspiring their gathering. 3 people who've inspired me recently. I think 4 just came to mind. But let's see who pops out of my mouth first. Bret Weinstein. I may be mispronouncing his last name. He's popular on the internet. Never met him in person, but that is one who came to mind. And in a sort of similar vein of controversial online figures, Elon Musk, who has inspired me many times and inspired me again recently. And let's go with Lex Fridman, who has also been on my list before, but again, inspired me recently. And 2 of those are related to each other in how they inspired me in the last 24 hours, which is a podcast of Lex Fridman's podcast, the Lex Fridman podcast, I think it's called. And he has been pushing the boundary of what's too long for a podcast for a while in a way that I admire. And this latest one is over 8 hours long. And I haven't listened to the whole thing yet. I'm only about an hour in. But so let's go backwards and run through how Lex Fridman, 3 ways that Lex Fridman has inspired me in the last 24 hours. One of those ways is by posting a podcast that's over 8 hours long. I just think that's delightful. I think it's brave in a way and courageous. Those are similar words, but let's go with courageous, as in full of courage, for in that way that's like not catering to what other people think is the right way, but following his own lead, following what he thinks is right, and resetting the bar for what we all might think is regular. And I greatly admire that. Also, I admire his willingness to not just make a podcast over 8 hours and post it, but try out new avenues, new kinds of conversations. And this conversation that he's posted, I think, is with multiple people. I just haven't gotten into the other people yet because I only listened to the first hour or so of it so far, as I mentioned. But again, a way of sort of breaking the mold of what we think of as a regular way of doing podcasts, which I really admire. And then the third way is that he, in that first hour, has part of the conversation that he has with Elon Musk is about his experience going deep into the jungle and trying a lot of ayahuasca, more than the regular small dose. And as a person who has experimented in my younger years with high doses of lots of different things, but including psychedelics, never ayahuasca, but I did get into LSD for quite a while when I was younger in doses that most people wouldn't fathom doing. And so I could really relate to both his courage in doing that and his experience that he shared, in which he didn't really have any bad experiences, and he felt both like connected to everything, which is a common experience that people have when they're doing psychedelics, and also his description of this beautiful glowing light, this life essence that is emanating from all life in the universe, and also his experience as of trees as dragons. All of that just delighted me, inspired me. I have my own relationships with dragon type of energies, which feel very friendly to me as well. So I just found that inspiring. There you have 3 ways that Lex Fridman inspired me recently in the last 24 hours. Elon Musk inspired me also in that conversation and in general. And the top way that comes to mind is his laughter. I really love hearing him laugh, and it reminds me of me. It reminds me that he's a human being in all that means, which is this perfect imperfection, right? I think we like to think of ourselves as this pinnacle of life, and indeed there are things about us that are amazing. I'm not trying to discount that, and Elon really embodies a lot of that, or demonstrates a lot of that, or pushes the boundaries of a lot of that. So there's this juxtaposition of, and I'm not saying there's anything imperfect about his laughter, it's just a very full of emotion laughter. And I think that it's easy to forget because of how intellectual he is in some contexts, what an emotional being he is as well, and how just how present he is to the moment, that he can laugh so often, I find inspiring. And that mixed in with another thing that I find inspiring, which is his relentless drive to push technology forward. And I think, like all things in existence, it could be looked at as a negative or a positive, but I find it very inspiring nonetheless. I think, again, it's courageous the way that he steps into new things. And he was talking on this particular podcast about how you first principles thinking, and one of his sort of mantras that he's adopted and that he tries to push forward in his companies is to examine what can be thrown out before you go expanding or perfecting a technology, to go back to that first principles aspect and get rid of what is unnecessary. And he talks about how if you're not bringing back like 10% of what you got rid of, then you're probably not getting rid of enough. And that really resonated with me. It reminded me of a more crude saying that I have, which is you don't know that you've gone over the speed bump too fast until you go over it too fast. And you kind of have to go too far in order to know where too far is. Otherwise, you're probably not going far enough. And that's, again, a more crude way of saying a similar thing that he was saying, which is if we are not willing to go too far in either direction, then we're probably not pushing ourselves as far as we could be. And in fact, we may be sort of chickening out. And I find that very inspiring. And a third way that he inspired me recently was the Neuralink project, which was the main object of this particular conversation I was listening to, and is related to those things. How willing he is to explore, how he has, in many avenues of business, seen a need for something and just jumped all the way in with his full self, emotional and rational, logical. Like I just recently listened to a book, The Master and His Emissary, which I highly recommend. And it's about the biology and physiology and psychology of our two-sided brains, and how those different aspects permeate our lives, our experiences, our society. And I find Elon Musk to be a nice, that like he's got this high level operating system on both of those halves. So again, that, yeah, I mean that what we might call the emotional self and what we might call the logic linear self. I do think, as the book I mentioned, The Master and His Emissary, points out, really one doesn't exist without the other. They're both quite fallible without the context of the other, and it's the two working together that gets us the farthest, the most, the best experiences. There's a hummingbird out there. I just caught my attention. So those are three ways that Elon Musk inspired me just recently, with his laughter, his emotionality, his willingness to go too far and then back again in order to find those sweet spots of progress, and his leaping into the Neuralink project, which is sort of a demonstration, a exploration of both of those things coming together from my perspective. Third, or first, depending on which way you're going through this, the first person that I mentioned at the beginning of this, Bret Weinstein, I believe is his name. If I'm not, I'm hesitant because I feel like I'm mispronouncing it. But in any case, he's quite an intellectual. Again, a person I've never met and am unlikely to meet, although you never know. I'd love to meet all three of those people. But Bret inspired me in a podcast that I was listening to him on with Tom Bilyeu, and it was actually a compilation of at least two podcasts, but it was a deep conversation where, again, he explored concepts that are often so controversial that other people aren't willing to go into them, and he articulated so beautifully something that I really believe, which is that if you're afraid to explore what the real truth of something is, then the sort of limiting or negative potential aspects of that truth or untruth, if left unexplored, those are the things that often control us in a negative way. And he was talking particularly about some controversial topics, one being the IQ conversation, which was interesting the way both he and Tom danced around that, and another being Hitler and the Nazi movement, and how he had seen some pictures of just how everyday life was occurring so close to where all that Auschwitz, pardon me for mispronouncing that. I should know. I read it, but I don't say it out loud. But, you know, the horrors and atrocities of what happened during the Holocaust were juxtaposed to normal everyday life for many people. And I think we forget that because of the way history paints things. But Bret was talking about how he has been willing to dive into what's the actual truth, what's the actual like biology behind certain things, because when you really get into it and illuminate it, then you're empowered to make different choices going into the future and understand things better, instead of just this sort of this narrative that I think is very popular lately, where something becomes taboo, and so we let like the worst presumptions about it control us instead of really understanding it. And so that's not a popular opinion or a popular framework in today's day and age, but it's one that I really respect and admire and am inspired by, because I think we need to look at the actual truth of things, even if it seems hard, because by, and not in a judgmental way, but in a real, actual, like scientific way of looking at things to understand how they came to be, even those worst case scenario things, because then we can have a better chance of understanding how to keep them from happening again. The Holocaust being a great example of that. So Bret inspired me in his willingness to dive into those taboo type of topics with a real intellectual clarity that I don't see much of. And he also inspired me by his willingness to even mention some of those in this public podcast with Tom Bilyeu. And he also inspired me by his patience with Tom, and I admire Tom greatly, so I don't agree with some of the criticism that I see of Tom, that he talks too much or interrupts too much, because I tend to be from the same camp, and he's just engaged. But I think sometimes a guest will either push back against that in a podcast, and like Jordan Peterson comes to mind as someone who just drives through and doesn't allow himself to be interrupted sometimes, and has like a framework that he's trying to get through without taking in the other person's feedback. And Bret really inspired me in his ability to have an actual conversation where he has a position that's firm, that's clear, but he's also able to listen to and take in what the other person is saying, interjecting in the conversation, and have that kind of dynamic, alive, real-time, present conversation that I so love and enjoy and admire. And then last but not least, I will say that Bret inspired me recently in listening to these older conversations with his admiration and appreciation of his wife, something that I think we don't see enough of, where partners are appreciating their partner and how much they have influenced and contributed to their own growth. And I think good partnerships are always full of that mutual support and promotion of one another's growth. And I think Bret just subtly, but more than once, mentioned his wife in a way that made me as a viewer, as a listener, aware of that appreciation that he has for his wife's contribution to his own work. And he wasn't going into her contribution to his life or their personal life, although I'm sure there's plenty of that there as well, but he was just bringing little bits of that into his conversation about his own, let's call it, intellectual endeavors, because that's what the conversation was about. So there you have it, 3 ways that 3 people inspired me just in the last 24 hours. I'd love to know who's been inspiring you and why. I think this is something that I would love to promote us conversating about all the more, because I think it's a worthy conversation. I think for me, reflecting on who is inspiring me and why is helpful. Hopefully sharing that with you has been helpful to some degree. I think it would be helpful for me if you want to share who is inspiring you and why, and it might be helpful for you as well. So there you have it. I thank you for stopping by. I thank you if you like and subscribe, and I'll be seeing you soon. Ciao for now. Peace.